here with composer, conductor, and winner of the 2025 Revelli Award, Ben Horne. Ben, welcome to the show.
Hi, how you doing? And yeah, great to be here. Thanks for
Yeah,
inviting me.
man. Appreciate you coming on in the winter months here. Okay, so I want to talk about the piece itself. I want to talk about your new music, but I think the appropriate first question to ask is, it's been like 2 weeks since you won the Revelli Award for Spiritual Symphony, and I'm just kind of wondering, like, how's it feel to be kind of in the pantheon with so many kind of goated names of this space, like Steve Bryant, John Mackey, Grantham, Omar Thomas? Like, how have you processed this, and how are you feeling about it just a few short weeks later?
That still doesn't feel real, especially when you explain it like that. Writing a piece like this and winning an award like that, like it's one of those things where you don't. This was definitely a case where I wasn't expecting anything out of it. It was just this is a piece that I wrote that in this particular case was also a part of my degree at Michigan State. And I was writing it for that and to get it done. And then why not submit it to a competition, see what happens? And here we are. And yeah, to end up in this place was not something I imagined. I will say it that way.
Were you shocked when they called you? Did you think someone was pranking you, or did you feel like maybe there was a chance that this was like for real?
A little bit of both. There was a part of I think because of the reception about it when the piece premiered back in March, it was really positive, and then just hearing about from other people over time, since it's been published over the summer, and when the recording was released over the summer as well, like there was enough positive reception that gave me a little bit of hope about it, but it was still a surprise when I got the call. I remember because I got the call from Matt McCutcheon, who's the director of bands at University of South Florida. They're playing
Go Bulls. Go Bulls.
they're playing one of the movements this spring. So originally, when I got the call from him, I thought it was about that. I thought it was about their upcoming performance, not even thinking about the fact that he would be calling on behalf of the committee for Revelli. So yeah, it was a surprise for sure in the moment.
Well, it's super exciting. I'm thrilled for you, of course. I thought the orchestration on this turned out incredible when I first heard it. That was like the first thing that jumped out to me. But I guess I want to kind of go into the backstory of the Spiritual Symphony a little bit and kind of educate myself even to an extent about kind of where this project came from. Because I know it goes back, I want to say to 2012 when you had just Deep River kind of as a standalone at UGA. So I'm kind of wondering, could you tell us like kind of what was the origin of your interest in maybe just Deep River as a standalone work kind of for that first kind of component of this piece many years ago?
Yeah, I mean, for Deep River, yeah, like the premiere happens in 2021, but the funny thing about that is that the lore kind of goes back even further than that, because already Deep River was one of those spirituals that was something that I connected with when I was younger, and something that I appreciated. And like the fun fact about it is that like I had wrote like a couple other smaller arrangement of things for like solo, and one for like a middle school choir when I had to like teach choir in my undergrad for a class. And this was all like way before this. Um, but what ultimately was the story behind the band version happening was me and a friend at a conducting workshop, Anthony Morris, who's written on the scores, the dedication. We were talking at a conducting workshop back in 2019 about putting something together for what he was going to do as a conducting recital the following year. And we had eventually landed on doing Deep River because both of us had a connection with it. He had a choir background as well, so that helped out too. And yeah, he was going to do it. Originally, the premiere of Deep River was supposed to happen in 2020 on a conducting recital. And of course, we know what happened in 2020, so the concert got canceled. And really, Anthony is one of the major reasons why you still end up hearing the piece anyway, because he was the one that connected me with Jackie Hardenberger at UGA for that premiere to happen. So a lot of ways, part of the reason why I make sure that even in the symphony that his dedication is still there is because without, him helping out and getting word out on his behalf, like this piece probably would not happen. Even the symphony probably would not happen in that way. Um,
Well,
so yeah,
specifically for you, I guess I was kind of curious, like what your in like kind of relationship with spirituals in general has been to get to the point to make a whole symphony out of them, like just kind of from your own personal like life experience.
yeah. I mean, I think so. Obviously, I grew up in a black church in Georgia, in Atlanta area is where I grew up. Um, and spiritual is just gospel music in general, which is a little bit different of a genre, but like that's so much ingrained into the musical language that is that I grew up with, that I'm used to, that I'm similar with, and spirituals kind of comes as an attachment to that, and being exposed to that. So this all for me, especially writing a piece like this and writing Deep River and these other settings, for me it's a connection to that upbringing. It's a connection to yeah, coming up in the church with friends and family, and then just being able to put that on the page. I mean, a lot of this piece, especially the last movement, "Go Tell It," is when I wrote that piece, it was mostly like I wasn't referencing anything specific. This is how I remember the song when I grew up, and I just wrote it how I remembered it, right? So, yeah, that's really most of the connection. It's just
Well, I guess kind of like I want to kind of jump off from there a little bit to your process, and I guess it's probably important for people to know you probably, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you consider yourself maybe even more of a conductor than a composer, even though you just won this major composition award. I guess my question is, how does your kind of experience as kind of living these two lives, conductor and composer, how does that like inform your writing process? So as a conductor, how did that affect how you approached putting together this larger work, for example?
yeah. I mean, when I compose music, I feel like in general, like not even just the symphony, I think a lot about the way it might feel to conduct it. I think that's where that connection comes in quite a bit. Um, and I feel like from a conducting perspective, or even I'll say even better from a teaching perspective, if I know that I'm teaching a piece of music or someone that's going to teach a piece of music, that there's things that I want to make sure that are like very clear and or just get the message across without having to like. And I think that comes across in like orchestration, for example. You mentioned that of like for me, I make it a really big point in my writing, especially for large ensemble writing, to make the orchestration clear. Because if the orchestration's clear, that makes it easier for it to be taught for a conductor to be like, hey, this is the foreground, this is the other voices that are in the that are like in the background or in the sides, um, and also I think that experience comes through of trying to find moments of where I want to feature certain things. Um, I think part of that goes from not just like conductor and teacher, but like even as a player, me being primarily growing up as a low brass player. So you get like in Spiritual Symphony a lot of moments where like the trombones have the melody, for example, and like a lot of that's because I'm like, all right, well, because I know what it's like to sit back in the back row and like not feel like I'm not very involved in what's going on musically, and I feel like I think great composers in some ways, or just good conductors too, that also is a part of that being in the back row. There's so much times where I grew up, sitting and counting rests, that I had nothing else good to do but to listen to all the parts that were going on beside me, and be like, oh, cool, that's kind of cool. I like how that composer did that, you know, and just kind of hearing how parts mesh. I think I kind of go off in a little bit of a tangent of what your question was. I know it was about conducting, but like that's kind of for me bringing all those experiences together of how you teach it, but then also the experience of just sitting and listening and all of that, and how I bring that into the process of orchestration and make the piece as clear as it needs to be.
Yeah, it sounds like there's definitely like a symbiotic kind of relationship there. It's like you know how you would want it to conduct it, so you can write it in a way that's conducive to that. And obviously, not everyone has that ability to kind of have that through line. So I think your orchestrations like turned out beautifully. Maybe that being one of the reasons. Okay, so kind of turning our attention back to the work itself, the Spiritual Symphony. You already kind of had this standalone version of Deep River back from 2021. And then you decided you're going to scale it up to this kind of four movement suite of sorts, a symphony, if you will. How did you go about selecting the other three spirituals that would kind of round out the symphony? Was it more of like melodic? Was it kind of more of an aggregation of trying to come up with different moods for the symphony? How did you go about coming up with the other material that would kind of build out the other three movements aside from Deep River?
It was definitely more of figuring out the moods that I wanted first. I think a lot of the piece as well has a lot of narrative attached to it, the symphony. Um, and yeah, it was a lot of trial and error of figuring out exactly what I needed to do. I remember the initial list because I started with a huge list of like, I want to do all of these. I had like maybe like 10, 12, 15 spirituals initially written down that I was like, oh, I'm going to try to find a way to throw these in. And then had to figure out a way to window the list down because I knew that too much material would just clog up the piece too much, or the piece would be 40 minutes long instead of 20, right? Um, and eventually, yeah, I settled on the five that are not Deep River because the first movement is a combination of two and the last movement is a combination of two. Um, and yeah, it ultimately came down to the narrative that I wanted to tell with the piece. Um, and really, yeah, that narrative with the piece kind of follows along for me in two goals. One of them was to show a narrative of like the evolution of black sacred music, starting with like tribal music and ring shouts, all the way to I only really get to like the 20th century, but to gospel music, and kind of showing a through line of that music with the symphony. Um, that's kind of one way that I chose like the spirituals that I do. So I start with Follow the Drinking Gourd, and the first movement uses like characteristics of what you might find in like tribal music. So there's like talking drum sounding things in the toms, right? And the whole movement is kind of based on this like processional sort of like chant. Is what it feels like, right? And it has this an ostinato that is supposed to have this perpetual motion, kind of me thinking about what a ring shout is, and that's kind of really what this movement about, or that what that movement is about in the context of the piece. And then it moves forward to showing eventually by the end of the piece, by the fourth movement, you get gospel music and you get these big orchestrations that are like choir music to me, right? So that's like one way that I went about picking them and kind of how that narrative fits in. And then the other way that I think about it as far as the narrative goes, is I tried to make a narrative of the piece being about a hypothetical slave escaping. So the first movement also Follow the Drinking Gourd, and it's paired with Wade in the Water. And both of those spirituals are like considered to be code songs. So they're about within the lyrics having the double meanings of telling slaves, hey, here's how you escape. Like literally Follow the Drinking Gourd itself. The entire lyrics of the song is instructions of how to escape from like Mobile, Alabama, going north, right? And Wade in the Water can also be code for like what to do if you're in danger when you're escaping and that type of thing. So I wanted to have that be so like that's like the prologue, if you will, of the narrative. And then eventually, as the spiritual goes on, you have Deep River that comes up, even though it was already written. But Deep River, obviously, in the lyrics is about crossing over. So, like, that's kind of your crossing over point of you've made it, and you've now made it over to a land of freedom, and you're no longer a slave. Sort of is the layman's term version of it. And then, of course, the last movement is just about a celebration of it. And then Motherless Child fits in as a couple of things. It kind of fits in as either the song that of the escape itself, and also it kind of fits in for me as a song that's about, or that movement being about introspection and being about just the psychology of being a slave more so than anything else, right? So those are kind of like the main narratives that are kind of at play that I'm playing with in the symphony, and the songs that I chose were specifically for those purposes, for those narratives that I wanted to tell.
Well, I appreciate you going into such detail. I learned a lot just in that answer about the work itself. I guess my last question about this piece in particular is, once you have the idea for the symphony, you go through your narrative process you just explained for kind of aggregation. How did you go about orchestrating it? Because, in some sense, these are kind of, beautiful, timeless melodies that we all kind of have access to. But the way you go about orchestrating it kind of in the idiom is kind of what makes it unique and kind of puts a new spin on it. So, in my opinion. So, what was your process on the orchestration of the folk songs themselves as far as setting it for a wind band?
It's a tough question for me to answer. Just because I can admit that like part of it is like, well, these are just the instruments that spoke to me in the moment. But like for example, I know one thing that sticks out to me immediately upon hearing that question is like the opening of the piece. The very beginning of the piece opens with a horn solo, and I remember specifically the reason why I made that choice was because of a particular recording of Follow the Drinking Gourd of someone singing the song that I heard. And I remember being around a couple friends that were like in the room when I was listening to it. And I just remember just distinctly saying, okay, this sounds like a horn solo. Like I remember specifically saying that, and immediately like later that day writing it out, I said, yes, this is the horn solo. This is how the piece starts. Because I was so stuck for so long of like, how does this piece actually start? I remember, I think when I first started writing the first movement, I think I started somewhere in the middle. I didn't start at the beginning of the piece. I think I started when the ostinato begins, which I think is like measure 20-ish or somewhere around there. And that was what I mostly wrote. And then afterwards, kind of after the fact, is when I wrote the beginning, which ironically is also how I wrote Deep River. I started with like the tuba solo and went on and then wrote the intro last.
Well, I guess everyone has their process, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's always different, right? Yeah, in fact, the fun fact about Deep River is that the introduction as it is now is not what was going to happen on the original concert in 2020 that got canceled. The introduction that is now was rewritten when UGA did it. So again, an extra thing. But yeah, the first movement, I didn't even start with the beginning. I think I started with the ostinato and wrote all of that music first, and then I wrote the intro and then the ending. But I'm trying to think of getting back to the question about orchestrational decisions. For me, yeah, because I always want to go back to specific moments of when I chose different things. I feel like when I chose, like the next thing that happens in the first movement is the low woodwinds, like low clarinet and flute having it, and there was just something about the timbres of the instruments at that range that spoke to me of like I wanted this to happen. I write in the music earthy is the color word that I put in the parts. And for me especially like clarinet in that range and then like the airiness of flute in the low range working together was kind of what was the main decision behind that choice. And I can go on and on about like how I made these choices for all the other spots as well.
Well, I
But
think that was a kind of
typically,
good glimpse into your process for sure. Okay. I think I want to maybe just kind of change gears and talk about Kingdom, which is your newest piece. And I think, you're not just like that spiritual guy, right? You have original works for this idiom. You have Scrap and kind of a grade 2, grade 3 piece. You have the Spiritual Symphony. You have these standalone movements out of it. And now you have this piece, Kingdom, that we're kind of excited to release in conjunction with this episode of the podcast. So could you tell us a little bit about kind of the inspiration for the piece? I was reading the notes before we started, something about the drumming in particular. I recall you writing about for the inspiration. So where did the piece come from, and what is maybe Kingdom about?
yeah, so Kingdom, I feel like in a more general sense, for me, Kingdom is just about like just a worldly view and a celebration of just like nature in that way. Um, I remember explaining it when it premiered as a part of the consortium that for me, Kingdom, when I wrote this piece, it's like you're watching like a documentary about Earth, right? And you got like Neil deGrasse Tyson doing the narration and whatnot, and like the opening shot is just like this wide shot of the planet of Earth from space, and then the piece is just the camera zooming over and then zooming in down into the planet and then rolling across the terrain, if you will. And there's still, it's not spirituals, but there's still like African diaspora music, or like part of this music that's part of this piece. And therefore, like the primary impetus or the big thing about this piece is that it uses African drumming stuff, particularly fanga, is what I'm trying to to work with in the second half of the piece is where it comes out the most. And just in general, I think that piece, like, so you have like the Earth documentary that's in mind. You have the Fanga that's happening, and then I would also say, like, for me, the other big inspiration about it was just like listening to the score of like the Black Panther films, right? But wanting to depict something that felt like more out in the open, more something that was more, something that was more worldly in that regard. But yeah, it's fun little work, 4 minutes. Starts with kind of like this fanfare idea that has this thing that plays off of it with the trumpets that's really, really cool, that's like offbeat a little bit. There's some minimalist aspects as well, as the piece kind of undulates and has a metric modulation in there, a few of them actually. So that may be where it might be difficult for some, or I won't say difficult, but challenging. But should be fun, you know. So long as people count, everything should be fun with this piece.
Famous last words.
Yes.
Well, I think it's a nice kind of contrast. It's still, your writing style, but it's kind of packaged in like a 4 or 5 minute kind of through composed piece versus a 20-minute kind of more grandiose setting with the other work. Okay, so I guess kind of in closing, like, what's next for you now? You've won this huge award. Hopefully, you are on people's radar now. You were always on my radar, but hopefully kind of society and large people are getting more familiar with your writing, and there's going to be maybe a increased curiosity around what kind of projects are next for you. I know obviously you're also busy as a conductor, but on the composition side, what are maybe some concepts you're interested in exploring, or maybe what are some projects that are in the works? And do you feel a new type of scrutiny or pressure around your output now that you're associated with this huge award in our space?
I'll take this opportunity to talk about the project that I'm working on.
Excellent.
The project that I'm working on right now is actually going to be part of, so for people that don't know who I am, so I'm currently a student at Michigan State, but I'm doing 2 degrees, so we've talked about conducting a lot. So I'm finishing my DMA in conducting, and then I'm also finishing what is my second master's degree in composition at Michigan State. And I graduate this summer, yay!
Let's go.
My last semester. But yeah, so Spiritual Symphony kind of served in part as like part of my final project for my conducting degree, ironically enough. But that means that I still had to do a final project for my composition degree that I'm still writing as of this moment, as of this podcast, as of our recording. And that work is a piece for chamber winds. The current working name is Iridescent Shades. I always struggle with names, but I think that name actually isn't too bad, if I'm not gonna lie. But the current piece is called Iridescent Shades. It's currently in the works to be a 5-movement chamber work, so it'll be on the larger side, similarly to Spiritual Symphony. But what is unique about this piece that I'm excited about is that each of the movements are based on artwork, but artwork that is also actively being painted. Me and the painter are like doing both pieces of art, if you will, at the same time. Which is really cool. It's been a really cool collaboration. The artist also happens to be a family member of mine. She's a distant cousin. And we've collaborated on a couple other projects in the past, but this is definitely going to be the largest project that we've done. And yeah, so each movement is based on artwork, and just with the style of everything that's going to be, I will at least say this because I've written a couple of the movements already. It is definitely extremely different from the music that people would probably associate with me the most. There are no spirituals in this one. I'll say that one. But even still, from like a piece like Kingdom, it is still infinitely different in style. But it's still me. And it's in that way, it's been really fun to work on, and I can't wait to keep tackling more of it and getting it done. But yeah, I also throw that piece out and throw that out as a plug because I may be putting out something of a consortium sort of sign up very soon if I get around to it. We'll see. I may or may not have already done it by the time this video comes out, but we'll see. But yeah, and it should be really fun. The instrumentation is also kind of unique. It's one single flute, it's clarinet, it's two saxophones that may interchange throughout the piece, which is why I just say saxophones instead of specific. And then there's a trumpet, there's a trombone, and there's a double bass as a part of it. So yeah, it should be really, really fun, really, really nice. I'm really excited about the music that I've written so far and the plans that I have for the rest of it. So
Well, I hope we can drum up a little support for you in the project, hopefully. So if you're watching this, make sure you sign up. You know, it's going to be awesome. All right, man. Well, thank you for coming on. I'm thrilled for you that you won this thing. I'm thrilled that we get a chance to work together. And I just think you're super cool and super dope. So thanks for coming on this little show. Appreciate you, man.
thank you for having me. This was fun.
All right, man. I'm going to let you go.